There, oh, perfect. All right. So, if you will, I would like for us to read this article that was in, I think, the Washington Post. What did it say? Yeah, Washington Post. Last week, I was wondering how to segue into the conversation around white fragility, and this popped up on my screen, and I just thought this is the best way to get into it. If anybody else needs one, we have more copies of the article. All right, so I didn't want to just read it to you, I wanted to read it with you. I wanted you to be able to follow along. Okay? It had been a week since the road sign had gone up near the entrance of their 116-acre farm in Northern Virginia. And the furious emails, calls, and Facebook messages were still pouring in. The responses didn't surprise the owners of Cox Farms, who had long taken politically charged stands on their land, locally famous for its massive fall festival. In 2015, a Black Lives Matter poster led local police unions to call for a boycott of their hay rides and pumpkin patches. Get them where it hurts, right? And last year, a pair of signs, "We love our Muslim neighbors," and "Immigrants make America great," sparked some backlash. But their latest, "Rise and Resist," had triggered a particularly angry reaction last week from conservatives who had seen a photo of it online and viewed the slogan as an attack on President Trump. So Aaron Cox Lowe, who runs the operations side of the 46-year-old business in Centerville, started thinking of some new language that everyone could agree on. Almost 6 months to the day since the neo-Nazis and white nationalists marched through Charlottesville with torches, Aaron's sister had an idea. Maybe we should change "Rise and Resist" to "Resist White Supremacy." Lily Cox Richard texted her, "That way, if someone takes a picture of one of the signs to post and says they are saddened or disappointed, they will be explicitly revealing themselves as the racists that they are." "Yeah," Aaron responded, "that sounds good." On Friday afternoon, down came "Rise and Resist," and up went "Resist White Supremacy." About an hour later, a message from a woman named Rebecca, whose Facebook profile was an image that read "Team USA," popped up in Cox Farms' Facebook Messenger inbox. "Whatever your own personal agendas are, none of us want to see them on display at a place we once enjoyed going to for tradition. It is truly disappointing." The vitriol only intensified in the hours that followed, which baffled Aaron, who, other than a white supremacist, would be offended by a message condemning white supremacy. She also understood, though, that this is America in 2018, a time of such fierce division that even voicing opposition to the ugliest beliefs could be twisted or taken out of context. On Saturday, in a Facebook post that has drawn more than 43,000 reactions and nearly 15,000 shares, she addressed the furor. "Our little roadside signs have power," Aaron, 36, began before explaining why they sometimes shared their opinions. "Cox Farms is a small family-owned and family-operated business. The 5 of us are not just business owners, we are human beings, members of the community, and concerned citizens of this country. We are also a family, and our shared values and principles are central to our business." Aaron's father and his brother, whom she described as hippies, started Cox Farms on a 40-acre plot near Herndon in 1972. Even in those early days, she heard later, people were sometimes offended by the family's signs, although those were often just off-color plays on their last name. Let that sink in. This story's author, by the way, is not related to the farmers. Eventually, her dad and mom took over the business, evolved, moved, and expanded. Their first experience with real controversy came in 2000, when conservative activists accused the farm of promoting gay rights because of 2 rainbow flags that flew over the tunnels made of hay. The flags hadn't been bought for that reason, but Aaron's parents, Gina and Eric, learned what they symbolized and embraced the idea. Aaron, a lesbian, had come out to them 5 years before the upheaval. At some point, it looked like we could be facing a significant impact in our business, Aaron recalled, but the family didn't flinch, and instead rallied supporters to their cause. It was a record-breaking season, she said, by far the best we'd ever had. Aaron, whose partner is of mixed race, also didn't back down after the threat of a boycott 3 years ago over the Black Lives Matter poster she put in a window of their home, which stands in the middle of the sprawling property. We're not seeking to alienate folks who have different perspectives on tax reform or infrastructure spending, Aaron said in her recent Facebook post, but when it comes to speaking out against systems of oppression and injustice, we see it as our moral responsibility to use our position of privilege and power, along with the tools of our trade and the platforms available to us to engage visibly and actively in the fight for justice. Our roadside sign messages are one small way we do this. Her post went viral, spreading rapidly online among both right and left-leaning groups, who then descended on the farm's Facebook page to give either 1- or 5-star reviews that had nothing to do with kettle corn or apple cider donuts. For Aaron, though, the blowback presented an opportunity. To change people's minds, even just by a degree or two, required communication that was respectful but honest. And here was a chance to talk to people who disagreed with her, lots of them. Resist white supremacy is not an inclusive message, complained Patty Weston Meislish, who lives in Louisa, Virginia. When you single out a group of people, you exclude them. This is a sad message. Yes, generally speaking, we are comfortable excluding white supremacists, responded Aaron, who studied psychology at Smith College in Massachusetts. If you know some who would be interested in dialoguing with us, please have them contact us. Shannon Lee Sidley from nearby Ashburn contended that she also supported fighting hate groups, but wouldn't spend her money at the farm because it would never post a Blue Lives Matter sign in support of police. You're right, Shannon. We do not support Blue Lives Matter. Police lives are already and by default valued in our society, she wrote. Black lives are not. So we believe that a declaration that Black Lives Matter is necessary and important. So black supremacy is okay then? Asked Lisa Lewis. This is not a message of love. This is a message out to divide people even more. I would never ever visit your farm because you try to force your views on your customers. That is wrong no matter what you say. Lisa, when we talk about white supremacy, we're referring to a systemic racism that is much deeper and more pervasive than any individual or group could be, Aaron replied. Black people do not have the institutional power in our society to benefit from so-called black supremacy. It just doesn't work like that. On Monday, Aaron wrote a follow-up post, thanking the thousands of people who had offered support and who vastly outnumbered the critics. She dismissed the idea, though, that what the farm had done, making a statement that could potentially harm its business, was in any way brave. She pointed instead to dozens of immigrant dreamers who had demonstrated against the threat of deportation at the U.S. Capitol, to Chris Newman, who has written about race and the challenges of farming in Virginia as a black man, to Eric Trammell, who as a sophomore at Centerville High School was kicked out of class when he refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance as a form of protest. We are white folk using our privilege and power to say something that should be obvious, but clearly still needs to be said, she wrote. And there's nothing brave about that. Then Aaron published the post, and as it too was shared thousands of times, she returned to the day's business of planning for spring, when the family farm will launch a new event at the corner market featuring pulled pork, live music, and root beer floats. Okay, so first, does anything in this whole narrative jump out? Anything? Okay, even in the context of what I've been sharing. Yes?
I think the mirroring, like when somebody tries to lift up one of her or security, like the idea that people brought up Blue Lives Matter or Black supremacy as trying to fight back against
Kind of false equivalency.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Good point. Good point. Now, there's something closer to the core of my thesis that I've been talking about these 2 nights that stands out here.
We were bad students, aren't we?
Okay,
Well,
go ahead.
I think that underneath the thing that you're saying is that there are a whole lot of people who feel as though they're good people, who don't understand how much their inactivity or refusing to speak out or refusing to push against something that's unjust actually continues to create a status quo that has never been righteous or just. And I think that churches in America, and I think they've played a prominent role in your talk for the last 2 nights, but I think that they unwittingly have done this probably more than other groups.
Yeah.
That they've, with the best intentions, have actually kept a status quo that is really quite unjust.
So what you're saying points us to what I'm thinking about. And that is, when you consider the signs that they had on their property in the early years, and you consider that one of the persons felt free coming out, they are not likely evangelicals. Right? If they are, I'm amazed. So, what I'm saying is that at the forefront of conscience, instead of it being Christians, it's people who just have conscience. So we have to wrestle with that. I mean, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but what if the local churches came to their support and said, but more than likely the people criticizing them were from the local churches. So this is the thing I'd like for us to grapple with, okay? And to uncover, and this is where we open the floor. Why this phenomenon of white fragility, where you come back with, well, what about blue lives, and what about black supremacy? I mean, that is an expression of fragility. And I mentioned last night, people are afraid that a change in the status quo can only lead to chaos, and that's not our goal. Our goal is to lead to community, to equality. So, anybody?
Fear of losing what you had, your control, and it goes back to tribal stuff, all of that. And so if somebody else is going to have more, I'm going to have less.
Yes.
Zero sum. I think you're right.
And to me, it comes down to what we were talking about yesterday. It's about the kinship. It's just about the kinship, and what Jesus taught was that kinship. And these are just people embracing the kinship and standing up.
How dare you be kind enough and empathetic enough to want to connect with people who are different. Yeah, I see a hand. Yeah, Walter.
I'm wondering if it could also be the strong resistance to being seen as a bad person, to have it exposed that we've been wrong or that we might have been wrong for a long time. That's not easy.
Is it embarrassing?
Okay, so I have an example that's kind of hopeful after that. I was telling Peter and Mary Ellen that Saturday before last in Santa Barbara, I was invited to speak to a group of evangelical seniors called Trailblazers. Yeah, get your head around that.
Did you accept?
Yeah. And so one person, a few of them had read my book, and a lot of them bought my book that day. But I remember the man in the back raising his hand during Q&A and saying, well, I voted for Trump, but I read your book and got a lot out of it. And it was, what I saw in there, what it looked like, was that he was letting everybody there know where I stand, okay? But his conscience was looking for something more. But don't think I'm going to extremes, everybody. You know, I'm still one of you, right? And in a funny way, I think he gave permission to other people to go ahead and read the book. If he would have said that I voted for Hillary or I'm a Bernie supporter and I read this book and I'm all for it, they might not have bought it. I don't know.
No, not Bernie.
I don't know, yeah. But I just thought it was, I mean, it was inspiring to me when they contacted me to come, and I almost waited for it to be canceled because they found out that they were on to me. In fact, the woman who actually invited me 2 weeks before the event asked if we could have coffee, and she was nervous. She was really nervous because I guess maybe she was finding out. I don't know if she found out about my Facebook profile or what, but she said, I really need to get together with you because I want to know more about what you're doing. And I said, how about this? Why don't you come to our church service Sunday? And then you'll get a real good dose of what I'm about and what we are about. And she did that. She came to our service. And she was all smiles. She says, you know, something like, it's not as bad as I thought, or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. And so, but we went ahead with the coffee date, and we had this exchange where she wanted me to really understand that there's a different population, and she didn't say these words, but I had the potential of getting her cut out of the group, so she wanted to make sure that, you know, my approach was genial, and you know, I didn't change anything. I was the way I was that Sunday and the way that I am tonight. I didn't bite my tongue, and I think some people are really, I think a lot of seniors are looking for ways to connect with their grandchildren because they can't figure out how come Thanksgiving feels like this. And so I think that's one reason for, you know, the purchase of the books. But all of that just to say, there's hope, right? Anybody else? You're not buying it, right? There's no hope. Putting us on. Why white fragility? Oh, let me ask it this way.
How did it ever get here? Like, where did all this stuff come from?
Okay, that's an excellent question.
Thank you.
And I need, you know, I have shared this before. I can't remember if I did it here in Rebecca's class a couple years ago, but I have shared this before. Okay, whiteness is a construct. All right, it's not real. All right. I mean, 200 years ago, people were French and German and Brits and Irish and all that kind of thing. They crossed an ocean and they became white. You know, it was like magic. And so it took longer for the Irish to become white. And even longer for Italians. But after many hard trials, they made it. So they became white. But the thing is they became white over and against Africans and indigenous people. That's what makes white people white. And so, but it's not real. It's not a nationality in the same way that black isn't. And if you find somebody who's Yoruba or Igbo or Zulu, and then they cross the ocean and all of a sudden they're black, they say, when did that happen? Nobody ever saw me as black until I got here. That's the reality. It's a construct. It's not real, but it has to do with Western supremacy and our society that you'll hear people talk about, why can't black people or indigenous people get their act together? Why can't, the natives are always drunk and the black people are always in jail. Why can't they get their act together? Because my people came here from China, or my people came here from India, upper caste of course. My people came here and they're doing great, they're wealthy, or whatever. They don't see themselves as capitalizing, climbing actually on the backs of the people who are under them. They don't realize that black people and indigenous people are the ones who paid the price for them to be able, who suffered the dues. Okay, Andy?
Well, I'm not sure crossing the ocean did it. Africa has always been known as the dark continent, and the Brits, I don't know about France or, the rest of Europe, how they reacted to black people from Africa, but the Brits have always been prejudiced against Africans.
Yes.
And so I think that prejudice was already there. I don't think it happened like all of a sudden a black person crossed the ocean and they're black. I mean, of course it would be noticed because in Africa almost everyone's black.
And of course, I did oversimplify.
Yeah.
Because there was African slavery in Portugal, in Spain, in the UK, there was African slavery. But it started at some point. Before the slave trade, there was, there wasn't the same sense of vitriol and domination that Jean Valjean, right?
Well, you probably know this. I mean, the slave trade in America was much more vicious because the Arabs had slaves. The Middle Eastern countries had slaves that came from Africa. But the slavery in America was a particularly vicious form of slavery. And it started in the West Indies, where they started getting black people in to process the sugar cane. And it went from really, really bad there, and that translated into the United States.
Yeah.
And so it was a worse form of slavery than anywhere else in the world.
It was partly theological.
Oh, well, that's
you had to
where your
dehumanize,
Christianity
you had to
comes-
take away the humanity of Africans, in order to do that. Important point, Andy. Thank you. Anybody else? Why fragility?
Well, I think in some of the same way we've already been talking about this fear of the other, like I think of being in communities like here where we don't have a lot of encounters with people who don't look like us. Not that they haven't been here before, again, like our Passamaquoddy brothers and sisters and people who have been in this land longer than us, but I think in that sense, even just a fear of the other, whatever that represents, gets so heightened. And so in that sense, it becomes the other is this monster that may take, like as already been said, kind of take what is mine or something like that. And like you said, when we get close to each other and we're in relationship with each other, it's much harder to actually, see that as.
So how do we quell this fear of the other, along with the fear that you identified of, the zero-sum game, that if someone else gains, I lose? How do we respond to those fears? How do we overcome them?
Exposure to bring people together in a very mini way, as many people here know. There are three Syrian families here in St. Stephen. There's a wonderful little story of one of them being involved with a men's group in rural Charlotte County through a husband of a member of our support group. And they eventually, when they realized he was going to community college, this rural New Brunswick men's group gave a Syrian Muslim $250 to help him go to school. He was changing them. And not to say they were necessarily all opposed or anything like that, but there's a cultural difference. It was bridged by exposure.
Yeah.
And so when SSU or to Asia, the broadened mind is changed. And they are changed students. If you know, from year 1 to year 4 is a very different student. And part of what is taught here and all that. That's a mini way. And so to the extent that we can foster and encourage every kind of intersection.
So would you say that the SSU alum is less fragile than perhaps other?
Yes.
Yes.
Potentially, but still
Yes.
fragile.
One of the things, I've been working for several years on the issue of ending the use of Native American nicknames and mascots. In my home state of Maine, we had over 30,
Yeah.
and they're now down to 3. And it takes a specific amount of time. And it's the younger kids in my classrooms, time after time, because when I first started this and said, is there a problem with the Cleveland Indians, there were 99% of them who thought there's no problem, they were honoring them.
Yeah.
You take a class of students now, and I'm going to be in the majority rather than in the minority. And the concept that we've been breaking down is the idea of acceptable institutional racism, because it's not acceptable anymore. It was in the 50s, 60s, all through that period where we just accepted it. Now there's a questioning. So recently there was an incident at Wells High School in Maine where they are the Warriors. And they've been very quietly not using Indian heads on their sporting athletic jerseys. And the incident was that a quarterback on the other team came to play at Wells, and they were screaming epithets at him, and they were war whooping at him, and they were doing a variety of things. He has an American Indian background. And his mother, who was in the stands, was incensed. Wells High School has had to have meetings with their superintendent, their school board, over and over and over again, thinking that this was going to go away, and what they're discovering now is that the controversy keeps feeding and keeps reigniting itself. So consequently, when I look at this fragility issue that you're talking about, and I think about it just this, it's just a question of that they're learning, and that slowly the younger generation that didn't accept this isn't accepting it anymore, and that's the issue that I see.
You know, I will also affirm that I think perhaps SSU has, yeah, it has fragility, but not as much. I would agree with that. I mean, it's one of the reasons I felt comfortable choosing this as a topic, because I wasn't ready for death threats, and there's some places that if I would choose this topic, people who sight unseen, would show up. We'd have to. I told Brent Bilski, bring your team over here and let's be ready to take care of business if something erupts. But I knew that wasn't really a thing. It wasn't necessary, and I knew that we could have a civil conversation in this room, and I was looking forward to it. And really, what I was going to ask is not only why white fragility, but how would you have me when I go back to Santa Barbara in a week? Communicate with people that I know there who are intimate, who are friends. When they ask, okay, how did it go? When they ask, you asked about white fragility when you were in New Brunswick, and now you're back in Santa Barbara. How did they respond? What did they say? Did they propose anything? Did they have any suggestions as to how things could be made better?
I was just gonna say, I think one of the problems is the chaos that you were alluding to, that there's this idea that if we disrupt the status quo, we'll go into chaos. And I think that idea of that chaos has been sold to particularly white people. If we remove this monument, there will be a public outcry. If we make...
Or we'll remove all monuments.
Yeah, we'll remove all the monuments. Everything will, every statue will have to be dismantled. We'll lose a whole part of our history. There is kind of this idea that I think as white people, we have been sold that if there are changes to the status quo, it'll lead to chaos. And I think about right now, the Passamaquoddy are going through recognition, and almost every complaint that I kind of hear about that process is about well, if they own the land, what, does that mean I own mine? It's the chaos, right? It's the fear of the chaos. So nobody wants to, acknowledging somebody else's rights has been sold to us as this will ensue chaos. There won't be, the world as we know it will implode. And the truth is, and I think it is it's those, so even in the example of the Syrian man that was given, it's through relationship that we break down that fear. Because if you know somebody who's Passamaquoddy, or you know someone who's African American, then when somebody tells you, oh my gosh, if they get more power, the world will be chaos, you can see that that's not true. Right?
Yes.
But if you have if you're being sold that it will lead to chaos and you don't have those relationships to counter that message with, then you buy into that.
So let me ask you this. this sense of chaos that's being feared. Is it possible, just speculating, that in the States, this is the reason that we love to be armed so much?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you also think part of it might be an acknowledgement or an understanding on some level of the damage that we've created for so many years?
Haunted.
And so a sense of that embarrassment, and so if I acknowledge, if I stand and say, I was part of this problem for years and years and years, and it's hard to stand up and say, I was wrong. So is that why we cling to that so much, to say, oh no, you're just in Canada, the term seems to be snowflakes now. So if we acknowledge that, if we say, now we have to pay attention, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of those things, if we stand up and acknowledge that, then we're snowflakes. We can't, toughen up, and everybody's so sensitive nowadays, we've got to,
So why is that?
I think again it comes down to the fear. I think all of it comes down to the fear, and it's that pride of I can't admit, the church can't admit that they were wrong. The church has never been wrong. The church wrong? That's absurd.
Or our presidents.
Oh yeah. The people that we've chosen to represent us, the people that we've chosen to follow, to help lead us, they were wrong.
And I think too, when it gets challenged, or like when we challenge a historical figure and say, like Ryerson University right now, it's talking about renaming, right?
Yes.
And a lot of that has to do with, Ryerson came up with the residential school plan and ran it. So we've been putting him on this pedestal as this educational, innovator, but to admit that he's not an educational innovator and that what he did ruined a whole race of people, and got rid of their leadership and might have been systematic racism, to do that, would really that would hurt.
So what is the salve, the remedy to heal white fragility?
I don't know if I would have an answer to that, but I was thinking as we're talking about, even I find in interactions with students as we travel, and in these discussions, we had our Sacred Encounter Symposium back in the fall that we were able to get funding to host with Indigenous leaders and church leaders, and that was a very moving experience and pretty new for, I think, a lot of us here. And in that sense, I kept coming back to a lot of our own, I think, attachment to false identities. So like we hold on to the church, or we hold on to this idea of whiteness, and in not exploring our own identity from our own heritage or our own history, and then forgiveness for ourselves and mixed in with that, like it's if I'm gonna stand up and acknowledge what has been done as wrong, it's not as fruitful for me to continue just, beating myself.
Can you write all that down?
Quite honestly, I'll say, David, you've been posting from Desmond Tutu, and everything you write on Facebook is just, quite honestly from Desmond Tutu, this idea of looking out at others in terms of forgiveness. But what does that mean if, as individuals, I think the moment I lash out in fear often has something to do with an unresolved hurt. And again, not to turn that around, that white fragility is just about white people's unresolved hurt, but I think in terms of lasting, movement, that moving forward in a way that's bringing healing and community, I look at that a lot of times and think, I travel with students and think, I always come back to Canada thinking, I know so little about my own country, and I go out and learn about all these other cultures. How do I identify with my culture and the rights and the wrongs within that, and in the church, and those very things?
Oh, what you're sharing sounds beautiful. You're saying that you're responding, recognizing what I have posted, but it sounds fresh to me. It sounds like, so what has happened is you've processed it and reinterpreted it and presented it, so I still would like it, if you don't mind, whenever you get time.
Good thing this is being recorded.
What a cop-out. So, I mean, the same thing happened last night. Peter said, I taught him this, and I'm listening like for the first time. That's great. So obviously it was something that you internalized, and you gave it back to me in a way that I didn't recognize ever, you know.
Well, because maybe the example was, the particular example I used came from a different place, but the overall framework of understanding you helped me to get to.
All right, so I would like for you to write that too.
This kind of definitely relates to the whole idea of fear, and one thing, like I really feel about building bridges and approaching those. For instance, like I know, although I wouldn't have voted for Trump, I do know lots of people that voted for Trump, not because they were racist or because they're white supremacists, but because they were poor, and they like what he was saying about reaching out to, you know, lower income, you know, America. And so yes, like, yeah, you can dismantle him, but you can't necessarily dismantle their very genuine and well-founded fear. And I think what the saying is, like, families, my family is American, and there's cops, and so there's Black Lives Matter. It's not that they have any problem with kind of the ideology of freedom and equality. It's that they sense that, like, I don't know if I'm welcome, and if I support this, is my family gonna somehow be like trodden, or even like pro-life women who didn't feel like they could go to some of the marches because they didn't feel that it represented their perspective, or like, you know, you don't want to, you know, Black Lives Matter is not intending to demonize cops, but it does feel like that to some cops that I've, like, really, really good men. They're like, yeah, I do, I don't know if they would say they fear it, but I suppose it is fear. It's like, I feel affronted, not because I'm a racist or because I deserve some kind of, that I need to repent, but just because I'm a cop and I'm white, or, you know, like.
So that's where perhaps encounters can be helpful. I know that in Santa Barbara, the police chief and her team actually have met several times with the leaders of Black Lives Matter, and the past 2 Thanksgiving days she's been over our house for dinner. So she's intentional about being part of a world that she's never been a part of before. And I think that maybe what you're talking about can be remedied by conversation, by relationship.
Yeah, because reading this article, in the context of the article, I totally agree with the question, who other than a white supremacist would be offended by a message condemning white supremacy? Okay, yes, I agree, but sometimes the offense is not so much of the white supremacy as what they perceive that it represents. So like a really poor white person, which there's a lot in America right now, they say, or like white privilege or something like, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, yes, maybe their vision is small, or my vision is small, and they're not thinking about the bigger picture and, you know, all of the Black people that have been ostracized, but it's still, I don't think that's quite fair. And to kind of like chuckle, oh, of course you were white supremacist because you were offended by our message. Well, it might go deeper in a lot of cases. It might be something else. The fact that they're just like, I do not feel supreme or privileged. I have been screwed over by the same government that screwed you over as a Black person. So I also feel disenfranchised, and my skin color seems really irrelevant right now.
Yeah. I think that's a point well taken. The history in our country from the beginning is to play poor whites against Black people, and it's always been that way. And so that could be, another version of that same thing, where in order for the elite to keep people down, they have to make sure that white people are honored. Really, they have to make sure that so what happens is that white people end up voting against their own interests. They end up voting for people who are not going to help them, but keep selling them a bill of goods, because they're telling them in a way that makes it look like they're better off than Black people. And that Black people are the threat, not just Black people, but Muslims are the threat, and Mexicans are the threat. And so they create that narrative. So yeah, but that is a point well taken. Thank you.
It's just your question, what's the salve to, white fragility? And I don't know if this answers it, but my mind just went to the example of the farm in the article we read, because there's this stark contrast between the white fragility of the responses to the signs and that family and how they're speaking out. And it felt like there's this kind of fine balance between the way that they've recognised the privilege and power that they have and decided to use it in a certain way, but balancing that the use of the power they have with a lovely humility, about we're not brave, and really feel like they've stepped outside of their own skin and own experience to see broader than their own little group.
That's beautiful. They don't seem like Jesus people, but they seem very Christian, and I can really respect that.
My mind also went to this, and the way they made it sound like that was normal. This is just normal. This is what we should do. And I feel like part of the problem with us Canadians, and so I can't speak to the US, is that we think our leaders should do everything. We voted for these people, we put somebody in power, we're behind what somebody says here or whatever here might support with money or do something, but the individual responsibility, I think we hide behind our niceness and all kinds of things that kind of like, well, you wouldn't want to offend anybody or, all of that stuff. And I think that's a guise. As I'm listening, I'm thinking what I need to do is say, I have a responsibility. This should be the norm. And it's not someone who I voted for, it's not their responsibility, it's my responsibility. So if we as individuals, and then like people are saying through relationship, start to say, I need to do something.
This is being recorded, everybody, so I think that's great.
So there's so many things. Like I love this idea of reaching for the salve, reaching for the antidote. In the end, I really believe that somehow we have to tell a better story. Create better narratives, expose the narratives that artificially privilege some small groups and societies, and just show how wrong that is, and then lead a whole new generations of people into the belief that whatever privilege we have, because we're all a mixture of privilege and not privilege, whatever privilege we have, we need to learn how to use. We need to leverage that to lift others. And ultimately that somehow somebody's going to have to give a better story than we've had so far. And maybe it's going back into the heart of our faith traditions, but that's what we're going to have to find. But just an example I just saw recently that maybe I just quickly say a bad one and a good one. The good one is P.K. Subban is an African-Canadian hockey player who plays in Nashville now, but he's been totally invested in his community. When he's in Montreal, he gave $10 million for sick kids at the hospital, so people know that he's invested. He's a sports figure who's, just become great at what he does, and he did that. But in Nashville, what he did was even more impressive, I think. He took people from the police force and kids from the inner city, and he gave them tickets to the hockey games. And they have to go together and they eat together and have a meal, and then they have popcorn together. And he talked about ongoing relationships and friendships that happen with the police and these kids. And so, like some of these smart, creative little initiatives that get people in relationship. The bad one was just that one of the teachers over on the American side, when the Syrians first came here to us, one of the teachers heard the kids just in real fear talking about the terrorists that were coming to Canada. And she said, no, that's not true. I'm involved with the group that's doing that. And they said, no, those are all terrorists. She said, no, you know that not all white people, are all white people bad? And they went, no, some white people. What about black people? Are all black people bad? No, some people are bad. What about Muslims? Are all Muslims bad? I said, yes. It's just, and she lost her job actually, because she said, no, it's exactly the same. Some people are good, some people are, and then she, 2 days later, the principal pulled her aside and said, we don't say things like that to our children. We let each family decide.
Okay. Well, my time is up. Okay, one last.
So in looking at this sign, resist white supremacy, I think that like it's so hard to predict kind of the reasons why different people would have problems with it or make comments about it and things like that. So this is not, I don't think this would go for everyone. But I think that part of it might be that there's like resist brings to mind a very confrontational image. And I think that that naturally kind of brings out people's fear, for one. And so some of it's language and things like that. I think that people have a desire to have social cohesion. They want to make the world a better place. I mean, this is me, this is the optimist in me. And I think that sometimes when it's just a sign that says resist white supremacy, it's almost like this signal to conflict, right? And so what they're reacting to sometimes is the fear of what that conflict could be, kind of thing. Something like that.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I want to come full circle and close because, I've spent 2 days criticizing church, but I want to say that I think church is going to be just fine. It may not in terms of the expressions that we know and the practices that we know, but in terms of the Church of Jesus, we're going to be just fine. And some of it's going to be the result of people really listening. And so I wanted to close with this quote from Thomas Keating. Don't judge centering prayer on the basis of how many thoughts come or how much peace you enjoy. The only way to judge this prayer is by its long-range fruits, whether in daily life you enjoy greater peace, humility, and charity. Having come to deep interior silence, you begin to relate to others beyond the superficial aspects of social status, race, nationality, religion, and personal characteristics. So I'm going to close with that, and thank you all for being here.
So I just thought I'd take a second and thank everyone for coming out the last couple of evenings, or if you've been here for one. Thank you, David, so much for helping facilitate this really important conversation with all of us. And I really hope that we keep the conversation going. I mean, it shouldn't end tonight. We have to keep having these conversations in large groups and, awkwardly with your friend at coffee or whatever it happens to be. But leaving here and thinking, keep the conversation going. It's, up to us to take what we learned tonight and take it forward with us. And, hopefully we'll get a chance to hear from David more in the future. But thank you for participating and have a good evening. Thanks.
Yeah.